Good evening, everyone, and welcome to SocialFlight Live. I'm Jeff Simon. We have a wonderful show for you this evening. AOPA President Mark Baker is here, and we are going to talk about all sorts of things that are coming in 2023 and the state of general aviation. There's a lot going on and a lot of very important topics in order to cover. We are in the season of education as it gets colder for many of us in the upper climates here, where it was snowing today. So be sure to check out SocialFlight's FAA learning system, where you can get wings credits or AMT credits for just watching videos on demand. And in addition to that, if you are an AMP mechanic with an inspection authorization, your IA, then you can get your 8 hours of education that's required for your renewal straight through SocialFlight by watching our videos, taking a quick quiz, and it automatically prints your certificates and gets you qualification for that renewal. So it's a great opportunity to learn, to educate yourself, to get qualified and recertified as a mechanic and an IA. Be sure to check all that out. It's just there on socialflight.com. And tonight's broadcast is brought to us by Avionics. Avionics just has some unbelievable avionics. I am a huge fan. Their AV30 electronic flight instrument can do things that are go with either a DG or can go with your attitude information, primary flight display. There's so much that it can do for such a low price. The AV20 is a smaller version. It does all sorts of cool things. We're using both of those devices in that Mustang behind me, so you can check that out. Their Tail Beacon X is a full diversity transponder with ADS-B, Sky Beacon, Sky Sensor. Just check out Avionics and you can see such really wonderful things. Now, I'd like to introduce AOPA President Mark Baker. With over 40 years and more than 10,000 flight hours in his logbook, Mark Baker truly understands the general aviation community that he serves at the helm of AOPA, the Aircraft Owner and Pilots Association. Mark's a commercial pilot with single and multi-engine land and seaplane ratings, rotorcraft rating, type ratings in the Cessna 500, the 525, as well as the DC-3. As president of AOPA, Mark's led groundbreaking efforts, including the basic med and protecting pilots against ATC privatization, among so many other things. I am just thrilled that he is leading AOPA in the charge to protect general aviation, and very proud to call him a friend. Please welcome to SocialFlight Live, Mark Baker. How are you doing, Mark?
Well, I'm doing pretty good, Jeff, and thanks for having me on this evening. I really do appreciate the time to share some thoughts about aviation. It's a good time in aviation, so let's go.
It is. There's so many crazy things going on. I want to start with something, though, that you told me off the air to bring everyone in. You have owned how many planes?
It's a sickness, but over 100.
Over 100 planes, and one of the most iconic ones, probably one that touches my heart and my top, I don't know, 3, 4 of all of general aviation is the Beech staggerwing, and you have now added this to your bucket list.
I have, Jeff. You know, I like you saw that airplane as one of the most beautiful crafts ever built, designed in the early 30s by Walter Beech and Ted Wells, and I've looked at that airplane and I love the motor with the 985, which I've had on a Howard Beech 18. You know, I just think it's just one of those beautiful sounds of all time. But it is the art that brought me to that form. So it's a 1944 airplane that's going through finishing up its pre-buy right now. But I've been looking at these airplanes for better part of 10 years and finally said, I'm not getting younger. It might be time to get this thing done. So I found one that's an extraordinary and very low time airplane and got great history. So I'm anxious to get it out of there and hopefully bring it to Southern Fun.
Wow. Have you flown a staggerwing before you decided to acquire one?
Yeah, a little bit. You know, I've had the opportunity to fly a lot of airplanes, and having a Howard DGA, which is a very similar type model in terms of engine and kind of era, and then a Beech 18, so pretty familiar. I also had a Beaver with a 985 on it as well, so I'm pretty familiar with the kind of the feel and the sense of the engine and the airplane. But the essence of the staggerwing is unequaled. I just think it's too cool not to have.
No kidding. And one of the most amazing things I think I feel and love about that plane, by the way, it's so iconic and so gorgeous, at least in my opinion. It's our logo. So so you're going to wind up with Social Flight logo gear now because it's gonna be your plane, whether you like it or not. So,
Well,
but
thank you.
um, what's amazing to me about it is not only is it kind of gorgeous and artistic and a biplane, a classic biplane, but its performance and its technology are staggering. It seems to be the one biplane, the one aircraft that straddles almost like both eras of efficiency and modern with the old.
It's so cool to read the book, the Barnstormer and the Lady, which is the story of Walter and Olive Ann Beech coming out of Travel Air, which was the most iconic airplane in the 20s, and coming into the Depression, and having the desire with the designer, Ted Wells was the designer, to build this airplane, very expensive airplane, call it $25,000 or $30,000 in the early 30s, and thinking, is anybody going to buy it? The first company that bought was Ethel led, but the fuel company. And by the time they got to the war, they were selling hundreds of these things a year to movie stars, oil companies, wealthy people. This was the Learjet of the 30s, and then the war broke out, and they built 400 of them for the Navy. And they built an airplane that is stout, can go land in any grass strip anywhere. They put them on floats originally in 37 and 38. The airplane performs basically much like a Bonanza. The Bonanza, which displaced it because it was $6,000 versus $25,000 in 1946, does the same speed, goes the same distance, but they decided to, take the smaller, more efficient, less costly airplane and displace their own great design. So the last ones, the G models, were built in the late 40s. Or finished out the last 18 of them in the late 40s. It is a truly iconic airplane. I consider myself a steward of this airplane. I hope it passes on to somebody else. There's about 200 on the registry, something like that, maybe 50 or 60 that fly. So it's still pretty special. When you hear one, you know it.
Absolutely. And the other thing you mentioned about it, which is so wonderful, is that it's a story of a company really succeeding and doing the right thing, meaning that you mentioned that the Bonanza that they came out with essentially made the staggerwing go away, but they put themselves out of that market with another plane, which a lot of companies are hesitant to do. But what it did for them is basically they were their own disruptor, and it kept them in business, which of course they are in business with the Bonanza to this day.
It's an amazing story. I encourage people to read the history of the Beechcraft company, because they did that. And frankly, it was Olive Ann that gets most of the credit for that. Walter and Ted Wells designed the original product. Olive Ann ran the business, and Walter died in '49. So all of the Bonanzas you think of today were hers, and the King Air later on in life, and Barons and all that were her design and her approval to do that. I think there was one huge story that's really kind of fun to read. In the late 60s, Olive Ann was selling their first King Airs to General Motors, and General Motors did not want Beechcraft anywhere on the airplane at all. It was not acceptable for them to have a Beechcraft signature anywhere, including the instrumentation, airspeed. It had a Bonanza that says Beechcraft everywhere, and so she did. She complied and delivered a couple of King Airs that were completely, green, if you will, or white with no markings of Beechcraft. A few years later, she ordered her first new Cadillac. She required them not to have Cadillac on it anywhere.
That's wild. I did not know that. That is
It's a
wild.
fun story.
So we're here, of course, to talk about the state of general aviation and the work that you've been doing, a lot of different things going on. We had Congressman Sam Graves on the show recently, and one of the biggest things that was going on at the time, and of course is still a part of the process, is the FAA reauthorization bill, which is this opportunity to affect so much change in aviation. And of course, AOPA is a big part of that. Tell me a little bit about what's happening in this world and what you see for the coming years.
So Sam Graves has been a longtime friend, even well before my time at AOPA. I was a supporter of his, and we've flown a lot together. And I'm really proud of the way he's kind of positioning the first general aviation bill that has ever been presented to Congress. And he's working very partisan. Rick Larson, who is a congressman from Seattle, the Democrat, has been at Sam's aviation events in Turkey, Missouri. And they're working very closely together to try and build a program that helps us reinvest in these 4,000 plus airports that the airlines don't use. We're way behind in hangar building on these public use airports, ramp building potentially, where there's maybe a monopoly FBO. Ideas that we can help perpetuate the use and the reasons for general aviation safety, economy, and access for this country. He is very involved and to try and kind of move the ball in the right direction and investing in GA. It's been a long time, and I think I know he is the right guy to kind of bring that forth to this Congress. And I think we're going to see some really unique movements in the investment in GA.
Mm-hmm. What would you say are the kind of like the top 2 or 3 items that can change with this bill?
So probably the biggest one is going to be, getting into these investments, whether they be hangars or taxiways, because we're probably around 25% short in hangars in this country. Now, some models are different than other models where it requires FBO to build the hangars, or in some cases, AIP money could be used for hangars or taxiways for general aviation. And that's what we'd like to see, is have those choices be made by the individual airports, what best fits their needs. But to have access to some of that capital, we consider that infrastructure capital to go into these airports that have been around for a long time. We're so blessed to have 5,000 public use airports in this country, but to put some money back to work, because we are way behind in terms of the hangar program. Also, I think in some cases we've seen consolidations on FBOs. In some cases we don't need all the services that they provide at some of these airports. We'd like to have a public parking ramp space. May have to pay something for it, but to make a choice between the private FBO choice or parking somewhere else, I think they're the top 2. And I think we can even see some improvements in some of the basic med, which we've done really well with that. As you know, we've got 70,000 people that have qualified for that, working really well. Could we expand that? I mean, there's some other ideas that are working there, and as well as this mosaic rule, getting that done. DPE reforms, we're still at 700 or 800 designated pilot examiners. We should be at closer to 1,400, 1,500 again. With the growth in aviation we've seen, we're not moving fast enough to get these exams done in an affordable way.
Yeah. Let's talk about those items for a minute. Now, the first one, when you're talking about hangars and you're talking about the investment in the airports, I think that's more important than a lot of people realize, because it even ties to things like insurance. We have an insurance crisis. We think about aircraft kind of going down, and the big loud one is always, it's always aircraft going down in liability. A lot of this is when storms, when weather, when other things come through, and we don't have the facilities to protect aircraft. And the numbers of aircraft we have in our fleet compared to the number of new aircraft that we're building is an extremely different number. And so the idea that we can't protect them because of that hangar shortage seems like it plays a big role. What are your thoughts on that?
There's no question about it. The value of an airplane, if you're lucky enough to have owned one over the last couple of years, has gone up significantly. And make sure you've insured for the right value, please, because today these airplanes are very valuable, and in many of these airport models, it requires some type of assistance to build these T hangars. They're owned by the airport sponsor or the county or the city, and they're there for a long period of time, but they haven't had any funds to really build out these hangars. And you're looking at airplanes that start at $50,000 and go to $1 million. They're sitting outside tied down. It makes no sense for all the long-term, and these are long-term projects. I mean, these hangars are going to be there for 30, 40 years. So we'd like to see some AIP money get freed up to be specifically set for hangar development in these airports, because at the end of the day, the sponsor owns these hangars.
Yeah. The other thing you mentioned, or one of the other items that you mentioned there, of course, is also about parking. I think a lot of pilots would agree that as it stands today, it's fairly outrageous that our money pays for a public airport or a public use airport, and that there is no spot of any kind on many of them that you can simply park and walk out the gate without facing fees from a private business that happens to operate on that airport. What's the prospect of almost mandating or protecting something that allows that zero service option on a publicly funded airport.
So it's a very important piece of this, and we don't want to be priced out of these access points in these markets. And in many cases, we don't need the services or the fuel that they provide. And God bless, they do a great job. Most FBOs do a really nice job. But at some point in time, you don't want to be in the way of the Gulfstream coming in there. So give me a ramp that we can tie down our 172, in my case, a 185 or Super Cub, and get out in and out of the gate and be secure. Now, there's only 400 of these airports that are used by the airlines, so that's where the TSA issue becomes a real issue. But the rest of these airports really just need to have a protocol where they're identified, where is public transient parking. We're making big progress there around the transparency about the signing, where you can park. There's so many places that actually still have parking places, but they don't have any designated way to find out where it is. It's crazy. So the SAO guys, the state aviation directors, are trying to work through the charting, because actually they're the ones responsible, the states, for where this public parking might already exist, and where it doesn't exist, how do we create some with the AIP money. It's going to be very important as we go in the future with access to these airports, because we shouldn't give up our right to go to a public port.
Is it a possibility to have it be part of authorization, to be part of kind of a legislative thing, to say, assuming there's an assumption here that there is some room for it, or at least a couple spots or something, but to say that if you're talking about a completely publicly funded airport, that you have to have a spot on there that's not charged by the FBO?
Yeah, it's our view that that is actually a legislative activity that makes sense for us. Now, I didn't say free. It might be $10 overnight. I don't know what the prices are going to be. The airlines figured this out a long time ago, by the way. So they pay for $767, sometimes $200 or $300 a night to park an airplane that big on a ramp that's been provided by the taxpayers. Why shouldn't we have the same rights as general aviation and say, hey, we require a public spot? The equivalency would probably be $20, which is fine, because you're only allowed to charge for the actual cost of that asphalt or concrete and its maintenance. That's it, because it's already a public port. So we're just trying to get things done that the airlines did a long time ago. As with this consolidation that's happened, God bless, they do a good job. I don't care. Keep running your business model, but I want to have a place to park my little airplane that I don't need all the other stuff, and I want to just be there at a reasonable price.
One of the other things that you mentioned in your list has to do with public examiners of all different types, DPEs, whether that be for designated examiners for pilots, whether it be for mechanics, even AMEs, even examiners from a medical standpoint. It seems to be that we have this kind of challenging situation where the rules that we have, and we discussed this a little bit with Sam as well, with Congressman Graves. It seems to be we've got a bit of a challenge because the FAA holds the reins on creating these positions, because they get to say if there's a need for them. And in talking behind the scenes to many FAA folks, the answer there is, well, we're not really saying is there a need. What we're really answering is, do we have the capacity or the will to manage more of them? And how do we reconcile these two things where on the surface we've tried to create something that makes sense, right? We only want to make as many as there's a need, and then you prove, oh, there's an enormous need, and they say, yeah, but I don't want to manage that many people.
Yeah, no, it is a little bit of a chicken and egg story, but here's the big numbers. Is in 1980, we all know, was the biggest year ever for pilot population growth, which is about 50,000 PPLs issued in 1980. We had about 1,500 DPEs, according to the FAA back then, and we've fallen down to about 700 DPEs, some of which are not particularly very active, and it's very regional in terms of where the demand is. But the reality is, if we're headed back from 30, we were down to 17,000 PPLs, private pilot licenses, a few years ago. We're seeing 35, probably 40,000. We're going to head back to 50,000 PPLs being issued if we're going to come anywhere near filling this pilot shortage that exists for the airlines and others. So the reality is, we need to be back north of 1,500 DPEs, designated pilot examiners, very soon. they have to go to Oklahoma for a week or 10 days and get trained on how to do check the checker, check the CFI that has signed off this individual. And if they can't figure out how to do this through the regulatory side of the FAA, then we're going to have to come down and say, legislatively, you have to have a higher number. So I hate to go that way, to tell you the truth. I prefer to do that, but they're in charge of this area, and they haven't moved a dozen or two in the last 5 years in terms of absolute number of DPs. It's unacceptable.
Well, again, it covers all these things. And I mean, anecdotally, I have a very good friend of mine who is extraordinarily qualified beyond anything people would want. He's been waiting for, I think, 20 years on the list and has never gotten the okay. I've personally been on the list on the mechanics side for many, many years. It's something where a lot of very qualified people are, quote, on the list because they want to be able to do this. And their name's not coming up. It's not going to come up. So how do we get off that problem?
So, if you ask the group that's been working on this as a working group to come up with recommendations, they said that the FAA needs more supervision for this level. Okay, so it's a funding issue. Is it 5, 7, 10, 20 people? How many people is it? So the FAA now has to go back and tell us, what do you need from an allocation to be able to manage oversight and do a reasonably good job of making sure the checkers are doing the right job. And then we can react to this. But I think they've been stuck from a budget and all the other things. But they've got to commit. And I think we're going to hear this from either Congress or from the senior levels of the FAA. It's time to move the ball because it's crazy. We've qualified people that can be examiners. We have unquestionable need that exists. And you can already see it from the old days of a couple $100 to get a PPL to $1,000 or $1,200. Supply and demand is out of whack. And it's time for us to really push this hard. And it's unacceptable to say we'll study it.
Yeah. And it's even interesting. I mean, you said supply and demand's out of whack. It's this very strange situation where you have supply in terms of qualified people who want to be in that role. So both ends of the spectrum, right? You have a large population of people who want to be pilots, who want to be mechanics, who want to be a lot of things. You have a large, I believe, from what I've seen, a large population of people qualified who want to be examiners and help solve that problem. But we're missing what's in between the two. Can the FAA reauthorization bill help solve this, or is there something else?
No, we've tried to work through the working groups for too long, and I'm frustrated with that. It's time to make a law.
Got it. Now you also mentioned, I think it was probably your last item there, basic med, and I want to start by saying Dr. Susan Northrup has been on the show, FAA Surgeon General. She's wonderful. She's I think been very progressive, and a little bit unfortunately, very unfortunately, seems to be in the news with some, I think, perhaps unjustified fire coming on. Can you talk about what's happening at the moment having to do with her?
Yeah, there's been some suggestion that she's not done a good job, and I'm not going to go into the COVID vaccination or non-vaccinated kind of world, but are there more incapacitations existing because of the FAA trying to do anything to cover it up or suggest that the vaccination deal? The facts are, general aviation has just come through the safest 2 years in history. We've got hundreds of thousands of pilots flying, 20-some plus million hours a year, and incapacitations are still in the 1 or 2% if they can be detected, kind of thing. So I think the world of Susan Northrup, she's done the best job I can tell you from any FAA air surgeon that I've worked with for the last 10 years. She is a private pilot and active GA pilot herself. She always picks up the phone if I need to, put a phone call instead or send something. She's very diligent about doing the right thing. So I tend to be, when FAA is doing really good things, and she does really good things. It's not perfect. We always want to push further, get more things done, but she has done a fantastic job, and she's aligned her team to try and get and serve the general aviation public in a better way. Still opportunity, but I'm telling you what, the best I've ever worked with.
Yeah, and one of the things is, if there's one thing, if you asked me, what one of her biggest accomplishments has been, it's been transparency. It's been the fact that she came in and immediately said, well, if we can't fix right away the process of the speed of medicals coming through, if anything else, well, we can sure report on exactly where things are. And so she established that kind of transparency of things. Obviously, she's a GA pilot, flies a Stearman. She just seems to get it, and I hate to see anything coming out saying, oh, well, she's hiding stuff. It's hard for me to imagine that's the case.
Yeah, I would tell you that she's terrific, and we should be proud to have her as leading our aviation group through the medical world. And I think she's trying to make a difference and trying to do the right thing, minimize risk, and create less cost and complexity in the medical system where it's possible. And she's been a big supporter of making adjustments of the basic med. She has seen the facts that there is no safety difference between basic med and the third class medical, zero difference. So how do we accelerate some of those positive things that we've learned over the last half a dozen years of having basic med, and look at all the statistics and saying there is no difference? So how do we make this even easier for other people to apply, use this alternative form of medical, where it may be a higher weight, different in terms of altitude, things that really were kind of cobbled together, if you will, initially to get people comfortable. But now we have evidence that we're in a good place to expand it.
Right. And you mentioned I think the key word which seems to drive everything that has to do with medical, and that's this concept of incapacitation. It seems that is what drives everything. That there's this idea that if your doctor with basic med versus an AME, or whether it's certain meds or certain things, all of a sudden that's what we're all afraid of, or the world outside of our community, is the idea that there's going to be an incapacitation, and that incapacitation is going to have devastating consequences, in most cases beyond the individual pilot, because otherwise we wouldn't care as much as we do, right? It would be more like driving. So everyone seems to be worried that we're going to have a snowball effect of many people dying at the hands of a single pilot becoming incapacitated. And you mentioned, I mean, what's the evidence that backs any of this up? Because we don't hear about it except for the big news story every once in a millennia.
Well, Jeff, it is one of those things. It's like the comet that's eventually going to hit the Earth. We don't know when, but there probably will be one. In another million years or 2 million years. The facts are incapacitation is less than 2% of all accidents at very best, and has been that way ever since the beginning of the medical. I don't care, by the way. I
want to be clear about that number. When you say 1%, we're not talking about 1% of flight hours. We're not talking about 1% of flights. Let's be really clear. You're talking about, once we're talking about crashes and fatalities, what percentage of that is incapacitation?
After coming through the safest year ever, again, for this, continue to improve on safety to the lowest level of fatalities ever in aviation by hours flown, is 1% of all the accidents that we can identify, maybe, that could have had an incapacitation issue. By the way, which, people can have perfect medicals at the Mayo or any of these big clinics and still walk out the door and fall over. Predictable incapacitation, pretty much zero. But
so that's the other thing, which is, let me make sure I understand what you just said, because that's even more important, which is, so now we get ourselves 1% of accidents were down to, or some number like that, incapacitations. Now we have to look at that and say, of those, what was predictable and regulation would have changed?
In our view, nearly none. If not none, nearly none. I mean, it's just that kind of level. And pilots do their best job, and that's why we've seen the safety where we're at, and the same as the third class medical and the basic med. Pilots do the best job of judging their ability to fly every day. Not some doctor that you saw 18 months ago or 24 months ago that has no ability to forecast what you're going to feel like in a week or 6 weeks or 12 weeks. So we want to work with our doctors to make sure we understand all the implications of all the things as we get older and have different issues in life. But at the end of the day, the number one person that can identify a health issue is yourself. That's it.
Right. Well, I mean, you've done some wonderful work with Basic Med. I'm an enormous fan of it, and it seems like we're moving closer. I mean, when I think about it in the way that you just described it, there's basically kind of almost three levels of you've got the older model or the pre-existing and what still exists as a model with AMEs for the traditional medical route. And in those cases, you're going and you're visiting a doctor that's almost I don't want to, I don't know if that's not really the right word to say, but it's almost adversarial. You only want to give them as much information as necessary to get your medical. It's not really collaborative about like, how are you feeling and can we help your health? And moving to basic med, you're getting a form signed by someone who you're working with on a more regular basis, who's known you or who's doing your medical and is also part of keeping you healthy. And then you've got the pilot side you just mentioned of you really know yourself, and that's what you're using every day when you fly.
For those that haven't gone on the AOPA website and just taken the test for basic med, which is required every 24 months, you'll learn more about your physiology and the challenges and what works than you've ever done through a third class medical. I'm just telling you that, in all due respect for all the AMEs, and I have a lot of good friends that are AMEs, most of the time that they go to get their AME is to figure out how to do the paperwork in Oklahoma City. It's not to make it send you to the moon, and they do a great job generally. But the amount of time that you spend actually on the course that talks about, how do you take prescriptions? How do you feel about after this or after that? That course is free. It's fantastic, and it helps you really understand all the medical complications you might have, as we all have different issues at different times, stress and all. So I really am a big believer that the basic med actually helps you understand your medical condition better than a third class medical.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I'm very passionate about having to do with the medical side of things is this idea that if we move a little bit more away from the kind of Superman view that everyone has to hold a medical, you have to be the perfect specimen, perfect health, perfect everything, never have been depressed, never have had a problem, never have had to talk to a therapist, never have had a problem that you've recovered from, whatever that may be, or a heart condition, cardiac, something that you've come past. Then that leads more to a world of people trying to hide that or not seek treatment for that. That doesn't seem as safe as a world where we make it easier to get back in the cockpit throughout all these things, as long as you're doing the right thing and the right people together really feel like you're okay to fly. How can we move further? We've made some great strides with basic med, but how can we move further down that path?
Well, I think it is a real opportunity. I'm going to tell you, Jeff, a side story. One of the aviation events a couple of years ago, two guys approached me and said, had we had basic med when my dad was alive, he'd still be alive. He had his heart issues. He had all those issues from his doctor to pass, just because he wanted to fly. And ultimately he died. If he had been honest with sharing some of his conditions, he probably would have gotten a stint, done a special issuance, and probably been just fine today. And that's what I believe that the basic med has really done, is made you work with your personal physician and say, what do I really need to do to stay healthy? We all need to do the right thing and feel capable of flying. So I think the opportunities to go further with this are, we're working with ICAO right now to make this an international standard, because it really should be another way to fly privately, not for hire, around the world. And I think it's a real big opportunity to do that. We now have the evidence of a half a dozen years of really good safety. So I want to thank all members and all of you that are flying basic med for doing the right thing, making the right decisions every day. Because I think that's what pilots really do. They make decisions every day, every minute of flight. And by keeping ourselves safe, we've proven that some doctor in an AME world, or somebody that's reviewing your case in Oklahoma City, may not be the best reviewer. You are.
Right. That definitely makes a lot of sense. You mentioned with the ICAO side of things, so that brings something. Of course, I'm being here outside of Boston, I'm close to Canada. Well, basic med has is not a thing you can fly in Canada with. What do you think is going to be the first domino to fall? Are we going to figure something out with Canada, or are we going to, or is ICAO going to be our answer?
Jeff, I wish I could tell you that Canada is really frustrating to us, because the evidence is clear. They have a big aviation need, tourism need, and they're great, great neighbor for the U.S., Canada. And we've been successful, as you know, in Mexico and Bahamas and a few other countries in the Caribbean to be able to fly your basic med. And the U.S., I think, supports it well. I think it's probably going to come through ICAO as an international standard faster than the Canadians have done. And so we're in our 5th year of pitching and proposing in Montreal.
Our 5th year.
It is so slow. I mean, every time
You've got a lot of patience, my friend.
Well, I actually don't. Fortunately, I have people that work in AOPA that are good. But it's, it's a division of the UN, and they plan meetings to plan meetings to plan meetings to plan the meeting. So it takes a long time. But we are so far successfully continuing to move the ball through ICAO. So I do believe that Canada will accept the minute it's approved by ICAO. Canada will approve it.
And I know this is a loaded question. Is there even a remote range of how many years we're talking about before basic med pilots in the anywhere near Canada can use it to fly in?
I actually thought 23 would be the year getting through ICAO. It's probably another 18 months, but it's not long. I mean, not 10 years. It's in the next couple of years. I believe ICAO will react and get it accepted worldwide, which is
really?
Yeah.
With all member states. So you're kind of like I wouldn't say on record, but kind of saying let's even stretch it out and say you think within the next 2 years.
Yeah, I think that's right. And betting on government and timelines are never a smart bet, but we've been working this a long time, and the team has been doing, and so far we don't have any real resistors because the evidence is so clear. So I do think we get a pretty good shot where it goes really slow. And we don't need another COVID to slow things down where they didn't have any meetings for 2 years. Because I really thought we'd be done by now. Had we not had COVID, I really think we'd have been done by now. But because of the interruption and having meetings, it really slowed us down. But I think we don't have any significant detractors. We have a lot of supporters.
Yeah. Let's switch subjects for a moment, talk a little bit about some other challenges that people are facing right now. One of them, of course, with an aging pilot population is the ability to get insurance. What do you see happening on that horizon? What's the real cause of it? Because I don't hear of, again, we came from talking about pilot incapacitation and that's not really causing a whole bunch of things. So it's not like I've heard, oh, the minute someone turns 71, they auger in, and that's why we don't want to insure them. What's going on? Because so many people cannot get insurance once they pass a certain birthday.
Yeah, and we spent a lot of time in the last 3-4 years, and part of it is there isn't really good statistics on it, by the way, but the reality is we can show, because we follow every fatal accident or of that type, and there is no correlation with age in fatal accidents, 0. So there isn't a reason to do that, but there is, and we've been given lots of information about gear ups, starting with the tow bar on, banging into a hangar. There is a correlation as people age to having some of these ground claims, and we think that could be answered potentially with different deductibles or choices. We also have seen a couple of entrants that are hopefully going to enter the insurance market at the sometime here in 23 that are going to be using kind of black boxes, much like a TBM does today, which is tracking your approaches and your speeds and your flight patterns. Are you really flying 80 or 100 hours a year? Are you really current? And if you'll sign up for that, you'll be able to get insurance with no age limit. Now, this is just getting started. It hasn't really become commercialized or widely available yet, but there are a couple of new entrants. They're going to do it based on a risk-based assessment. I don't like Big Brother myself, but on the other hand, if it means I'm going to get insurance when I'm 75 or 79, I'll probably do it because that's the choice. I think the other thing from a cost perspective, it's been suggested for a number of years from the underwriters that having a no interest rate kind of market was hard on them to have their liquidity because they're required to have a certain percentage of their assets liquid, but there was no return on that because there's no interest that was secured. With interest rates going up, it may be, I'm hopeful, one of the offsets that comes back into insurance rates and rating because they'll have more liquidity with a return on it before they pay up. because I come back to the number one statistic, which is we're the safest general aviation's ever been, ever.
Mm-hmm.
And so insurance availability and rates should reflect that at some point in time.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned deductibles, because that seems to be an enormous difference between the aviation insurance market and many other insurance markets that are out there. And I've never understood that, even when my own insurance renewed, and as everybody's does, skyrockets. I asked them, okay, so what if I, dramatically increase the deductible? And their answer is, yeah, that doesn't change anything, and we don't even do that. Most insurers that I have spoke to, and again, it's anecdotal, you may have a completely different experience, or can enlighten us, don't use that as much of a tool in our market to change rates. Even if instead of a $500 deductible, you were saying, hey, I'll sign up for $10,000 deductible. They say, we don't care.
Yeah, I think we're starting to see a fair amount of that on the retractable market, where because a bonanza or a Mooney year up landing is a $100,000 issue today. And so some of that should be maybe a bigger sharing. And so we're starting to see a number of underwriters look at that, because that's one of the higher claims is a gear up landing on a retractable geared airplane. And for a $3,000 or $4,000 premium, you get $100,000 exposure. No, there's no personal injury generally on that, but that's a pretty big hit for a relatively small number. Premium I'm talking about. So is there a bigger sharing that can be done in some of the retractable markets? And I think that answer is probably yes.
Makes sense, definitely. So you've mentioned safety a couple times. Tell me about 2023 and what's happened, because flight hours are back up from pandemic levels, things like that. This is an area that we can celebrate, as I understand it. Tell me what's really happened.
So, pre-pandemic, we're around 20 million flight hours as measured in general aviation activity. Last year, the federal year ended in October, was about almost 26 million flight hours. So up a lot.
Yeah.
We all know people buying 172s or doing flight training, which frankly, which Richard and I were kind of concerned about. You got a lot of new pilots coming into a new environment. Which direction was this needle going to go? And in fact, it went down. Our fatal accidents is at the lowest level ever recorded in the last 2 years. Based on the number of flight hours, actually, we're down to 250 or 60 unfortunate fatal accidents, which still can be better. But we're 400 people lost their lives in aviation. We don't want anybody to lose their life in aviation. But if you go back 20 years ago, that's 1/3 of where we were just 20 years ago. I'm not making excuses for it, but it shows real positive direction.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, if you look at, what's happened in the last 20 years, our views up on our safety stuff are 8 or 9 million views on our safety stuff a year. Autopilots, GPSs, electronic flight bags are so much better today in terms of situational awareness, CFIT, all the things that can cause, problems have gotten better. Our technology is better today, and we've got a more diligent set of pilots that are looking at all that information. So it's very encouraging. Still got a ways to go, but it's really important to see that, hopefully someday we'll never be on News at 11.
What do you attribute that to technology? Do you think people are doing a lot more education themselves? Is it the simulators? Is it just everything all together? What in the world makes this happen? Especially when I think a lot of people were worried that coming out of the pandemic, where people were flying a lot less, we'd actually see a spike because of all the rustiness.
We sure were, but it was really interesting, our views on our safety stuff, as anything we do there is free because we want people to access it. Went from 3 or 4 million views on a YouTube to 12 million views because people had time and they looked at everything, sometimes several times. But we were tracking that in the early analysis stuff that Richard does about what's going on, what happened in this last accident. People have been following that in hundreds of thousands of views within the first 24 hours. And people have a curiosity, and the flying public trying to be as smart, as educated as they can when the neighbor asks or the relative asks what happened. And we try to not be way ahead of the NTSB. We very much support their work, but share what we know and why and possibilities that go on. And I think people consumption, I've always been a big advocate of reading everything you do and what went wrong, because I don't want to be that, next story. We all can make mistakes, human nature, but we can learn a lot about what happened. And I think the consumption of that has really helped us. And clearly, the technology today is so much better than the KNS 80 or the VOR to VOR, ADF to ADF, my era, when you go direct to and you've got traffic on there. And one of the great things, people give a lot of crap about next gen, and I've been on that advisory committee for 10 years, but having traffic, real traffic in your cockpit and real weather in your cockpit, it's a really good idea. And, couldn't have been imagined 15 or 20 years ago.
No, and it's not, and it's something we uniquely benefit from here in the United States. You don't even
Right.
have it in Canada. This is our unique benefit of being able to have our ADSB system give us weather.
That's right.
In addition to traffic. So clearly that's a great benefit. Another thing I did want to touch on here, though, with kind of this whole market, and when we talk about, you mentioned with insurance costs, that of course aircraft values are going up. Both you and I are very vested people in the future of general aviation. I think that drives what we do every day, and it might be great for a person who owns an aircraft to watch it go up in value and be able to, maybe someday cash in on that value. But it doesn't make me smile to know that my aircraft's gone up in value, because it means it's so much harder for everybody else. And I don't think it supports where aviation needs to go. What needs to happen to make it so more people can own aircraft, which includes not just the average person but it supports businesses, it supports flight schools, it supports everything when someone, and more hours when someone can afford a plane?
It's a really important question, Jeff, because we're basically playing with these same 200-some thousand plus airplanes for most of our lives. Peaked out maybe at 350, it's come down, started to grow back a little bit, and kind of the entry points are pretty steep. There's been some real successes, which we shouldn't deny. I mean, whether it's a Vashon Flyer, the RV-12, a Sling, there's a few airplanes, some constrained by this, LSA rule, which I believe we're going to see the Mosaic rulemaking hopefully this summer. Got some good reason to believe that'll come out. That would, enlarge the envelope of the size of what considered to be that kind of aircraft, which I'm very supportive of. But so you've got some innovators out there that are trying to create $100,000 airplanes at points of entry that are pretty good little airplanes. But then, just like everything else you saw in the automotive world or anything else, supply chain, they can't get the motors fast enough, they can't get the wheels fast enough, they can't get the brakes fast enough. None of these people have a problem selling $100,000 airplanes. They have a hard time building $100,000 airplanes because they can't get the products. So I think that this market has, and this is the part I'm very encouraged about, with flight hours up as much as they are, values up as much as they are, it's the mother of invention. There's a need. And I think you're going to see capital move into this market because, aviation, as we all know, has gone through cycles, but this looks like more sustainable. You've probably read that as well as I have, that, people have gotten onto general aviation in a way that they're not letting go this time, because they're not doing it for a flippant way. It's transportation for business, it's transportation as recreation, and it's just darn fun on top of the airline need to train a lot of people to fly. So we have a confluence of 3 or 4 factors that are saying there's a huge market here. And that's why you saw the price of a 172 more than double over the last 24 months, which is good in one sense, but it's proven the market is resilient and in very high demand. So I'm actually encouraged. Well, momentarily, there isn't any product that answers that solution. I think that we're in a place today between Mosaic coming on board, supply chains ultimately figuring out some of its, ways to build enough motors for these guys to build enough of these airplanes, because the demand is, as most of the airplane manufacturers are out 2, 3, 4, 5 years in build out, and it's exciting, but their flex up might be 20% when the market says I really want 500% more aircraft available at $100,000 to $200,000. So I'm actually thinking that we're on the eve of a long-term upswing, and you'll see more entrants because the demand's so high. Our demand has been 1,000 airplanes a year for the last 20 years. Right now, if you had 5,000 airplanes, they'd all be sold.
Right. If we look at the avionics world, it seems like it was regulation that changed that had a massive impact on all sorts of players being able to then come out with electronic flight instruments and all sorts of other things because the bar changed, the bar went down, and it's almost like the FAA finally yielded and said, we're not just gonna, say that a vacuum pump is the best thing since sliced bread. We're finally gonna allow people to be able to afford to bring products into the market. Do you see anything that could do that for the airplane as a whole, which has always been a brutal thing to certify? Because as you mentioned, it seems like the market is awfully poised that if someone can create the Volkswagen of the skies and pump out a ton of them at a reasonable price, that the metrics would actually work. The question is, could they ever get it certified?
Well, I think Mosaic is a big part of the first part of that change, and to say if it's a non-commercial airplane, we should be thinking about this a lot different. If you're not taking passengers for hire, and flight training is not passengers for hire, we should be thinking about this market different. Why shouldn't a 172 go through the same Hertz testing as an Airbus, from a lightning perspective? And I think there are some really good proponents within the FAA that are really working through this. It's been way too long. It got shelved for a while, COVID and all the other stuff. But I'm pretty optimistic you're going to see big movement there that's going to help us recognize that there are 2 and 4 passenger airplanes that, really for transportation, safe, more safe than the current LSA route, because weight is a positive in many cases. Propulsion may be totally piston, and maybe some hybrid that comes into the market because of that propulsion that could evolve that we've learned out of eVTOL. So I'm boy, oh boy, I'll tell you what, Jeff, I'm probably more excited about what I see in the next 3 to 5 years than I saw in the last 5 years in terms of propulsion, new activity, demand, and the excitement in aviation. For my 45 years I've been flying, I hadn't been as high as it is now.
Wow, that's fantastic. And speaking of that excitement, let's talk about building pilots as kind of our last item for the evening. And that is, you've got the You Can Fly initiative and building pilot communities. Tell me about what AOPA is doing moving forward in how we fill this need for pilots.
Something I'm very proud of is the AOPA started 7 years ago looking at a thing called You Can Fly, and had a couple of significant donors that said, if you can build this, we support it. And now today, including Textron and Williams Engines and lots of individual donors, still provide high school curriculum free to now 400 high schools last fall, with 15,000 young people taking this classes from 9th through the 12th grade, which give them pathways to become either pilot, engineer, whatever it is, maintenance individual in aviation. The demand in Oklahoma being our #1 state, we got 60 high schools in Oklahoma that 85 colleges and universities get credit for. So you can save a year of tuition by taking this program, which we provide to these high schools for free. We have to teach the teacher, and almost 100% of these schools that did it last year signed up again this year. The kids are just, it's doggone it. These kids want to be in aviation. 10 years ago, I had so many people tell me that, kids don't care about aviation. They just want to do this or that and the other thing. We didn't give them any pathways. We didn't have any ways to find a way to get from the 9th grade into a career in aviation. We will be someday in 2,500 high schools, 10% of our high schools in this country is my goal. And I'm pretty excited about this because it proves that kids care about aviation. They're going into the military, they're going into the airline, GA, engineering, doesn't matter. And that's what we want, is aviation stands tall in the careers that kids can choose, and they just got to know about it. They got to see the pathways, and that's what this curriculum does.
That's fantastic. And how do people find out information about the You Can Fly? I mean, I'm sure there's going to be either people who are teachers watching the show right now, or people who certainly know some.
Just go to the AOPA.org website and click on it, and You Can Fly. It'll take you through there on how you become a high school, how you become a sponsor. And by the way, if you happen to be in that neighborhood, these kids want to come out and see your airplane, they want to touch your airplane, they want to hear about how you fly. You can help these teachers teach better. So it's been a wonderful program, and EAA works with us around their chapters to kind of get the kids out to the airport. It's been probably the most significant thing that I've done with my 10 years at AOPA.
That's wonderful. I love the program. I've seen the materials. It's absolutely fantastic. The other thing that I'm very curious about before we run out of time is we also seem to have an opportunity for people when they reach a point in their life where they finally have the maybe it's the house, maybe the family starts to come together, and they've never been exposed to flying, but they now have some disposable income. What do we do about this group? This seems to be in some ways sort of the forgotten group. I don't know that they're forgotten, but we haven't. It's so easy to wrap your arms around kids programs, but what do we do for this group?
So we have this program called the AFTA, which is a iPad or laptop or program where how do you become a better pilot faster? Because it's frustrated me that the average PPL is now north of 70 some hours, and my day, your day, maybe 40 hours and a half. You're ready to go take your test and become a private pilot's license. And
yeah, we were always when in our day, right? We were always racing against that limit. You looked at it like that Chinese restaurant menu: one from column A, two from column B. You mapped it all out. I could do all. Okay, I can get this done in 41.3 hours.
Exactly. And this AFTA program works really well for people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s potentially, to help them understand where they are in their flight training, working with their flight instructor, and scoring every flight. And we've seen a really nice adoption at that level. Individual that says, I want to figure out where I'm at. I don't want to this just a CFI to tell me. I want to know where I'm at. If I change CFIs, I want to know where I'm at. So we find some of those folks, by the way, to be our best members because they love our safety stuff. They love what we can do to help them save money on the time to get their PPL, and then introduce them to the flying club because they have the money to go play the game. And so we like to invite everybody in the aviation that has interest.
How do you think we can do a better job of reaching out of our own mailing list and our own world of pilots? How do we become the on the shelf of the average magazine place, or how do we get to people so that we start bringing them into the fold?
That's the question I'm trying to figure out myself, Jeff. That's a really good one because I don't have that answer, and we're looking to work with some agencies and be spending a day or so with a couple of them right now, or to try and figure out how do we reach the people that always said one of these days, but never connected the dot. And we all run across them. Yeah, I've always wanted to become a pilot. Well, here, but they don't understand the access points, which I think AOPA does a great job. If you tap in, learn to fly, we come up pretty high, and then we can help you get directed. And some of the flight schools do a really good job. Some are okay, and some are not so much. But we have to help them rank order themselves from the students. We got 8,000 or 9,000 inputs last year from which flight schools are really doing a nice job and which ones might want to learn a bit from some of their peers. Because we've got to take care of, you still have 70-80% of the people that take flying lessons that bail out.
Well, we don't usually take any comments from the audience during the show, even though people type things in. It guides our discussion a little bit. But I'm going to say that good friend of ours, Brian Schiff, just typed in Super Bowl commercial.
Awesome. Say hi, Brian.
So maybe we'll put a fund together to make that one happen and put GA right on the map of everybody at the halftime show.
We'll take his first donation to make that happen.
Exactly. Well, Mark, thank you so much for taking time to join us here on SocialFlight Live. It's been incredibly informative. Again, I am so thankful for the work that you're doing with AOPA, with all of these efforts to help us, and personally for your friendship. I've really appreciated everything that you've done.
Thanks, Jeff. You have a great program. Good luck to you.
Absolutely. Thank you and good night. Be sure, of course, to like us, subscribe, and be part of the SocialFlight family. And until next time, I wish you all blue skies.